Mattie, congratulations on the runoff.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Let's talk about, in your view, what are the two biggest challenges that Fort Worth faces right now?
Yeah, good question. I think number one is our economy. Every major city in the United States is really facing that, emerging from COVID. Where are our strengths, where are our weaknesses? And we've talked about that a lot in Fort Worth over the last several years. Where are we economically? How do you compete not only across the country, globally? How do you compete with other Texas cities? So that's the number one factor we really got to focus on. I've said this before and I mean it. We are positioned for greatness in Fort Worth. We are going to emerge from COVID stronger, but we have to take the responsibility really seriously, and we need an economy that works for everyone. We really focus on what it means to have a living wage job opportunity, a talent workforce pipeline, starting with your students that are in classrooms now and moving through. And then secondly, I think is just how do we work together as a city? Every U.S. city is divided right now. We just went through a historic presidential election. And I think communities that will be successful find a way to work together across political lines, uniting a community, and really focus on what it looks like to have a world-class city. And I think those are the two predominant issues I think we're facing.
Let's talk about the second one there. That's kind of the elephant in the room. Fort Worth, for a long time, has been the largest Republican-led city in this state. Obviously, municipal races are nonpartisan, but it has voted blue the past few cycles. Does this runoff for mayor represent something bigger, do you think?
You know, it may, honestly, but I also think it's really exciting for me as a potentially the youngest mayor that would lead a large city in the country. It is time for my generation to step up and be willing to lead in significant office and take the torch. For me, it's no secret, Jason, that I'm a Republican. I've worked for Republicans. But if you talk to people that have really worked with me, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, they understand what it looks like to lead regardless of party. And that's the kind of mayor I'm going to be. And I've really tried to make sure my campaign focused on that. I think that's why we've been successful so far. I have support from Democrats, Independents, and Republicans, and that is intentional because that's how you govern at City Hall. So as to whether this is a significant demarcation in the history of Fort Worth politically, I don't know the answer to that. But I do know that Fort Worth has been really blessed by wonderful leaders over the last 20, 30 years. And that now it's time for that trajectory to continue. But I also know what it takes to govern a city, and being partisan is not the answer.
One of the simmering problems that the city faces, as you well know, too, is policing. Fort Worth has had obviously its own issues with police in the community over the years, but the city's clearly made strides to improve that. Where do you think work remains?
Yeah, great question. First of all, we have a phenomenal police chief in Chief Neil Noakes. We also have a new police monitor's office led by Kim Neal, allowing the professionals to do their job and understand what it looks like to reform policing to meet the needs of all community members, but also ensure that we keep our city safe. That is fundamental to any successful city. Right now, you're seeing this rhetoric across the country that is so damaging. I think it started with defund the police, right? It was this PR campaign. I'm opposed to that, Jason, because that doesn't make a city safer. Do we have reforms to make? Absolutely. What does it look like to have true community policing, beats that are smaller for all police officers, meeting the needs of communities, a scaled-up version of the CIT team, crisis intervention, Hope team, which is for homeless folks, working with Chief Neil Noakes and his command staff to understand what they want to achieve, to have a true servant's heart, which I know that Neil has. Those are all opportunities I'm excited about. I've tried to be careful on the campaign trail because I think it's irresponsible for elected leaders or those that are asking to be, put into office to jump ahead of professionals. I'm not a police officer. We ask police officers to be all things to all people all the time. Are we perfect? No. There are lawyers and doctors and teachers that are not perfect. Police officers are no different. But if this community can rally behind our department to understand how we meet the needs of community, that's the most important thing we need to do to make sure we have a safe city.
The next big police trial, as you know, is going to be in Fort Worth. Aaron Dean, former police officer in Fort Worth, on trial this summer for the murder of Tatiana Jefferson, who was shot to death in her own home. If elected, though, how would you manage the fallout? Because that's going to be one of the first things to happen to the new mayor.
So first of all, it's going to be a priority for anyone that's elected mayor. You probably would take office around June 15th. Working at a grassroots level with community leaders in all sections of Fort Worth to understand, first, making sure they understand the process. The city of Fort Worth has nothing to do with the process of that trial at this point. It's in the hands of the DA and the judge. Are they going to sequester the jury? Are they going to ask for a change of venue? How long is the trial going to take? Is it going to be televised? All the things that are going to be open questions. The city has a responsibility to make sure community understands the steps that are going to move forward and what's likely to happen in this particular case. The second thing I would say is we have to be prepared for folks to be out and concerned and protest and all of those things. You don't do that overnight. that's going to take a week's time, months' time, working with different people in Fort Worth. I'm worried about Fort Worth residents and how they feel. Folks coming from outside our city to influence the decisions that we make here it does concern me, and you've seen it happen in other parts of the country. And you have to have a mayor that's prepared to do that and work alongside community.
What would you say to people who might live on the South Side who wonder what a young white woman knows about racial problems?
Yeah. So I think totally understandable, right? Can't help the package that I'm in. I think for me, my responsibility is to do a lot of listening before I take action. They don't understand my life, and I don't understand theirs. You have a responsibility, especially when you're a young white woman, right, living on the west side of Fort Worth, to listen more and understand the plight of our community. Our Black community has asked for help. They've asked for more access and transparency at City Hall. I'll be the first person to offer that. But the rhetoric of what divides us right now is what concerns me. I've had my fair share of understanding what real racism looks like. I've told this story before, but I grew up in a community that was oftentimes known for the Ku Klux Klan. In my small hometown, I didn't understand what that meant, but I did pretty quickly when I was in high school. And you had moments of real, a sort of a different pathway you had to take as a city. And I think the same thing's happening in Fort Worth right now.
The homicide rate in this city last year was pretty bad. It was worse in 25 years. If elected, what do you do on day one to change that?
Yeah. You work with your police department. Mayors don't change homicide rates, right? Your police department does. And you also have to chase after any attempted murders. I understand that the department's really taking those seriously right now. You also need to understand in the middle of COVID where people were turning to crime, maybe where they had gotten themselves away from that because they were in school or other places. What does it look like to rally around community differently? Really focus on those areas where we see the homicide rate at a high level and focus there. It's concerning, Jason. I mean, you understand what Fort Worth had a reputation in the 90s and 80s as a murder capital of the United States. Since then, we've really enjoyed the reputation of one of the safest cities in the country. We have to hold on to that. Back to your original question, the economy, you can't have a thriving economy if you have a sky-high crime rate on your homicide rate. So it's something we have to take responsibility for. Gang intervention efforts, youth crime, all those things are a factor in homicide, and also domestic violence, we know, is a huge factor.
Do you think, it sounds like COVID, you think might have really influenced those numbers?
We'll look across the country. Most definitely,
Right.
absolutely.
Okay. I want to ask about property taxes. For the first time in 4 years, the City Council did not lower the effective property tax rate. Instead, the budget for the city grew $8.3 million. Mm-hmm. Are there efficiencies to be found in the city budget?
Absolutely. There are always efficiencies. We always can be better. I'm really well positioned to understand that because I was a part of the CMO team, having worked there and watching that budget be written. That's one of the first things I'll have to do this summer is working with the city management team to understand where are their priorities and how are we really going to sell that budget to the city of Fort Worth. The other thing I'll say on property taxes is interesting. The city budget is about a third of your tax bill in property taxes. The rest are school districts and the other jurisdictions. We need to make sure citizens know what they're getting in value for that 1/3 of their tax bill. And then furthermore, you're never gonna feel, I as a homeowner am never gonna feel a break in the taxes until we flip the tax base. It is 60% residential and 40% commercial. The number one priority for the city is to enhance the commercial tax base with economic development efforts that really work to lessen the burden on homeowners. And until we take that responsibility seriously, you're just not gonna feel a break. And when we don't lower the tax rate below the effective tax rate, if that's a decision, if we do increase the budget by $8 million, it's behoovent on the city to communicate very clearly with citizens exactly what they're getting for that money. And I'm a normal taxpayer. If I know that my trash is getting picked up, I have superior water services, police and fire services, I feel pretty good about the check I'm writing, the Tarrant Area Appraisal District and Tax Assessor. But right now, I don't think that communication factor is there where it needs to be for people to really feel secure about how they're spending their tax dollars.
So is it a matter of getting more businesses in here, recruiting more businesses?
Absolutely. Increasing your tax base. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Who do you have your sights set on?
Well, I think there's a few businesses that are actually based here that would love to expand or create world-class headquarters here. We need to roll out the red carpet to those that are already here in Fort Worth, Texas.
Yep.
The second thing.
What does that include?
Well, let's ask them. There are 2 or 3 companies that I'm not allowed to really talk about that would love to build a world-class headquarters here. What are we doing to really enhance that opportunity for them? Is it land? Is it tax incentives? Is it a better city hall that's working for them to really roll out the red carpet? Is it workforce talent? What are all those different avenues that we could explore to have them here in Fort Worth in a bigger presence? And the second piece is we need to go on a roadshow, Jason, with our business leaders that have built strong businesses here in Fort Worth to sell the story of Fort Worth. Go to cities where maybe they don't feel like they're really respected from a business-friendly climate, places like Portland and Seattle where things are a little bit contentious, and ask the question, what would it look like for you to be in a business-friendly state and a business-friendly city to be successful? And we think Fort Worth is that place for them.
Are you going to go on the road if elected?
100%, absolutely, you got to.
Has the city done that in the past?
I don't know. I think some on specific missions, but
I
I
know
don't
like
think
overseas and stuff like that, sister cities, I didn't know if...
Yeah, I think this would be a unique approach.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, I want to talk about Sundance Square. The stockyards are booming right now. We've been over there multiple times recently, but Sundance Square is struggling. Obviously, the Bass family has really worked to cultivate that for decades, but is there something that City Hall could be doing to help revitalize that destination in the city?
It's an open question, and I'm excited to work with Sundance, with Fine Line on what they need to facilitate new opportunity and growth in Sundance Square as we emerge from COVID. Retail is changing. The way people want to interface in stores and restaurants, all of it feels more local and creative, and I think they have the vision to make that happen, but I want to make sure City Hall is working for them to really facilitate that opportunity. Fort Worth has been successful with private-public partnership, and I think as long as we focused on the models that work for us, we'll be successful. That's what made the Stockyards successful.
Does downtown need to be revitalized at all?
I don't think so. I think it's more about, well, let me say this. It's not just Sundance Square. You need downtown to work across the entire corridor from east to west, from Lancaster into Sundance, all the way to North Main. You're seeing Heritage Plaza come to life. All these different exciting things are happening in Fort Worth, I think is wonderful. The other thing I think we've focused a lot on is for a long time downtown in Sundance, it's kind of referred to as our front porch for downtown. At times it was the only thing we had going. That's not the case anymore. Now you have near South Side, you have West 7th, you have the Stockyards, the Cultural District, all these fantastic places. You have Alliance, Texas, and North Fort Worth. I could keep going. That is healthy for the 12th largest city in the country to have a diversified opportunity for entertainment. But now across the country, you're understanding what does it look like to pivot post-COVID and reevaluate things. And I think Sundance is going through that. And again, what can the city do to facilitate? That's an open question and a dialogue that we'll have to have.
Has Sundance fallen victim to all these other successful developments, West 7th,
well,
near South
Sundance
Side?
is unique because they were situated downtown where you had a huge commercial base and businesses closed. They sent their employees home. And so they didn't have a normal clientele that they would on a given year, and tourism stopped.
And conventions.
So they had two things that were working against them in Sundance Square. So I'm bullish on Sundance. I think they're going to come back really strong, and I can't wait to work with them.
Let's get back to Unity for a moment here, too. There's obviously a clear divide in this city. How will you be a mayor for everybody in the city as opposed to just people on the north and west sides?
Well, I think, I'll say a few things, and I think it ties back to the other question you had with me as a white woman connecting with the community. Who you put around you, what your table looks like to give you diversity of opinion matters, and it's something I'll be really intentional about. And it's not just about skin color, it's also about experience, it's about language barrier, all the things that we know that we have in droves. It's a positive. Our diversity is a strength here in Fort Worth, matters. I'm not from Fort Worth, Jason. I grew up in a really small town. I grew up on a family farm. I was third generation there, really simple upbringing. My mom was a single mom for most of high school. A lot of people don't know this. I was on CHIP as a kid, right? So I have a background that lends itself to be empathetic and understanding. We also adopted our daughter when she was 10, and I understand a whole different world because of that foster care experience. Those are all things that inform me both as a mom, as a leader in this community, and will be as mayor. So when the question becomes, how do you connect with Fort Worth? You must be a mayor for all of Fort Worth. And I do have diverse support across the city. People I've done life with for years. I've just chosen not to make it the predominant conversation in my campaign to put people out there because I needed people to know who my supporters were. It's more grassroots than that, and less affront to people to understand. And I think actions speak louder than words. As mayor, really boots on the ground, understanding there's a lot of power in being a younger mayor that's raising young children. You're constantly in the community because you're with your children, working across Fort Worth. Having been chief of staff for Mayor Price and City Council for those 5 years, I have a unique perspective working across every single council district, working with council members to understand what they want to achieve. And that's the same mentality I'll have as mayor.
Sticking with Unity for a moment here too, let's focus in on the Stop 6 neighborhood. Yeah. On the southeast side, there's been a lot of changes down there, a lot of investment by the city down there as well too. But one thing that we haven't seen a big change in, and folks down there haven't seen a change in, is the food desert. There are, I think, one or two little markets. Ramey Market, I believe, is one down there. But what could you try that City Hall has not tried to help get fresh food to the people who live there?
So I can't speak to whether we've tried certain things or not, right? Because sometimes those conversations may have happened. I wasn't in the room to understand what was being done. The first thing that's happening right now in Stop 6 that's so exciting is the Cabell Place redevelopment led by Fort Worth Housing Solutions in the city of Fort Worth, the Housing Choice Grant that we received from HUD. It all spurred from neighborhood improvement dollars we put into Stop 6 to start street improvements, security, cleanup. All those things led to what you're seeing now in redevelopment and new housing that's going to be with rooftops and multifamily housing, commercial tax base in Stop 6. You can start to look to what does it look like to have food desert problem solved. If we need to incent grocery stores in South Fort Worth, I'd be the first mayor to say, absolutely, let's work with the council members in that area to make that happen because it's a significant problem. I think it'd be cool to have a marquee place, maybe like an HEB, where people are going to drive in droves. I mean, I have friends right now that drive to Parker County to go to HEB, right? There are certain grocers that people flock to. And I think that's the kind of exciting innovation you need to have in a community to get people excited about all of Fort Worth. And we have a responsibility, Jason, to focus on East and South Fort Worth because we haven't in decades. And now is the time to be really, really specific and have strike teams really in all these different areas that we know they need improvement in. And food insecurity is one of those food deserts.
What does your focus look like then?
Yeah, in East Fort Worth? Yeah. So when you talk to community members that have lived there, some decades, some are new residents, it's about jobs, transportation, food access, keeping open space beautiful, parkland, all those things factor in together. But I don't think City Hall needs to come in and dictate. I think it's really important that we create an atmosphere where they feel supported and they have the expertise at the table, but they still have community members dictating what happens in a community. And so I think I've used that term before, especially with the East Fort Worth Business Association when I interviewed with them a few months ago, is this concept of strike teams in business, in food deserts, in education. All of those things matter.
Fort Worth's about to get $173 million in stimulus money from the Treasury Department, just came out the other day. Obviously, there are some rules that go with that, but there's a lot of latitude for the city as well. How do you think that money should be spent?
Fort Worth needs world-class infrastructure to support the growth of this city, and I think if we're smart, you put that in the ground where it's needed most for infrastructure. There's also some opportunity to create some real economic development opportunity. So for instance, we need more incubators or accelerators for entrepreneurs and small businesses to grow here. And if we could use those dollars as seed fund or maybe partner them with private dollars, that's a really smart investment that will pay dividends into the future. I also want us to look at what's the importance of having a global mindset in this economy. We are a global economy now thanks to technology, and we need to make sure our small businesses and entrepreneurs and really our large businesses are able to compete on a global scale. And how does City Hall really facilitate that? The other thing I would say is inside the confines of City Hall, we don't use technology and communication tools in the best way that we should to really meet the needs of citizens. We are an on-demand culture now. We demand things really quickly. And are we meeting the needs of citizens? I don't think we are all the time, and we really need to think differently about what that looks like. Now's the opportunity. They're moving into a new City Hall. And so how do you really pivot to have a world-class City Hall that meets the needs of citizens, where people, when they do bring a development or they come downtown to pay their water bill or whatever it may be, they leave going, man, they've got it together here. That felt like a private sector interaction and a get-to-yes attitude at City Hall, which is really important.
A couple of last questions here. Trinity Metro bus service got a fraction of what it asked for in the city budget, and the Trinity Metro says it's running a bare bones operation. Is Trinity Metro being innovative enough with its funds?
So I think for us in the city of Fort Worth, we are in a wonderful position to pivot and think about world-class public transportation in a new way as technology has evolved. We know that Transit Move Fort Worth created their transit plan. One version is visionary. The visionary plan is over $2 billion in capital cost, I think $250 million in operating cost. You start with the money, Jason. You cannot hide behind it. Nickel and diming our way to a public transportation system that works is not the answer. It can't come out of property taxes, and it can't come out of general fund, in my opinion. Their sales tax dollars are capped. They need additional partner cities. I want us to look at a regional system working with DART and DCTA across North Texas to really make sure we have a regionalized public transportation system that works for citizens. I'm proud of Trinity Metro when they work with private sector partners in their zip zones like they're doing with VIA. There are other opportunities. I'm not a public transportation expert, but I know we need to think differently. As someone that's worked in advocacy and public service for 17 years, I've seen it work well, and I've seen it be a complete dumpster fire, right? And if we want to be successful to have a world-class public transportation system, it's not just going to come from local funds. It's also going to come from the state legislature, and importantly from the federal government. How do you layer an opportunity to create a real pathway to success? And it's not just public transportation. It's also our highway infrastructure, our east to west corridors, how the city fund bond projects are delivered. All those things play in, and it absolutely impacts Trinity Metro. I know one thing they've been frustrated about is where the city's responsibility falls to having bus stops that work for people, covers. Those are conversations we need to have, because I think those are connection points and infrastructure the city has a responsibility for. But when it comes to the bus service and your train service and your rail, all those things, those are big dollar projects, Jason, and you can't hide behind the money. We need to start with it first and come up with a game plan that's multifaceted and advocates across the entire city.
And then fund it after that?
Absolutely.
If elected, day one, what are you doing when you sit behind the desk?
So first you got to put a staff together. What does it look like? How do you cast a vision and think about 30, 60, 90 days? So those are the first things we're going to be doing. I mentioned the budget process is being written when whoever takes office this summer. You have a responsibility to really sit down with city management, be really involved there. Third would be working with Chief Noakes and Kim Neal as we approach that trial of Aaron Dean, being prepared over the summer. Public safety more broadly, and then importantly, working with your council members. The mayor does not have a supermajority. You have one vote on council. You have to have 8 additional votes to get anything done, soon to be 11 with redistricting total. And so you have a responsibility to get to know your council members, understand what their priorities are, what do they want to achieve, know what their staffs are trying to do. And there's no one better suited to do that, because I did it for all those years, and I think those are the main responsibilities I'm going to have this summer.
Congratulations and good luck on June 5th.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.